Well, right now, at this very moment, as America-hating communist Democrats in Congress are running roughshod over America, decimating the rule of law out here in this once great republic, Republicans in D.C. are crowing about their electoral chances in 2022 and 2024. CIA deep state bag boy and admitted liar Mike Pompeo and his pals, you know the gals, mattress ladder climbers Nikki Haley and Kristi Noem, they're salivating at their chances in 2024 should Trump decide not to run. Kevin McCarthy is finally, he thinks, going to get a chance to be House Speaker and share power with Pelosi while holding the gavel himself, pretending, as opposed to just letting Pelosi keep it in her clutch. Kevin can't keep congressional Republicans from voting for this infrastructure bill. But he wants us to take him seriously. He wants you and me to believe he'll be a great Speaker of the House. What a joke. Seriously, so complete is the failure of the Frank Luntz houseboy, Kevin McCarthy. You know, it almost makes me think a part of McCarthy is okay with just allowing Pelosi and Schumer to more completely trash this great nation, just so that he and his loser pals over at the RNC can pretend to ride in on their white horse and save the American people a year from now in the fall of 2022. But if you're my age, maybe a little bit older, you've lived through an awful lot of failures by the Republican Party. A lot of them. These clowns have been given power at the state and national level over and over and over again. And time after time, they have botched it. Total failure across the board, beginning with the man the RNC and GOP proper loves to venerate, Ronald Reagan. Once CIA operative George H.W. Bush took over for Reagan after Hinckley's assassination attempt, Reagan's 2 terms may as well have been handed right over to the Rockefeller wing of the Republican Party. Reagan gave us unfettered, expanded illegal immigration that ultimately killed off his home state of California. George H. Bush and the war in Iraq? No new taxes? Thanks, loser. You gave us Clinton. The contract with America evaporated into nothing in the face of a telegenic saxophone-playing Rhodes Scholar president from Arkansas. Perfect. George W. Bush, compassionate conservatism, massive war debt, Common Core, the predecessor to CRT, and a nation so thoroughly disgusted by Republicans that they decided to punish us by giving us Barack Obama. The reality is this. Republicans have been amazingly consistent at one thing. Republicans have been amazingly consistent in their failure. They have consistently failed to deliver on their promises. They've sold out this country. They've sold out the American people. They've sold out to narrow interests. They've been distracted by stupid wars in the Middle East. They've engaged in pointless own the libs rhetoric instead of seeking real changes in the trajectory of this country that we need so badly. But of all of those disappointments, of all of those failures, nothing is more egregious than what happened in the 2-year period of 2017 through 2018. Against all odds, Donald J. Trump came down that escalator, ultimately delivering the Republican Party its biggest victory and, more importantly, its biggest opportunity in a century. They had the House, they had the Senate, they had the White House, and a majority of the Supreme Court with a new seat waiting to be filled. Folks, these are the opportunities a political party sees once in a lifetime. And they got that opportunity through Donald Trump's America First agenda. Trump picked up the $1 trillion bill that was laying on the sidewalk and handed it right to them. A platform of securing the border, rebuilding American industry, ending pointless wars, stopping inner city crime, rejecting political correctness. And after all of that, what did we get 2 years later? A big tax cut for corporations and Jared Kushner's criminal jailbreak legislation, a law that let felons out of prison. Perfect. But we didn't get border reform. And we didn't stop the endless and pointless calamities in Afghanistan and Syria. So how did that happen? How did that happen exactly? It happened because the Republicans let Paul Ryan and his executive branch bag boy, Mike Pence, handle the Trump agenda. The same Paul Ryan who hated Trump and actively denounced Trump in the primaries. The Mitt Romney lapdog, Paul Ryan, who, by the way, was absolutely planning to take over the vice presidential slot after he and Reince Priebus tried to force Trump off the ballot after the Access Hollywood tape and make Pence the nominee. Paul Ryan should have been toppled from his spot as Speaker of the House immediately. But it didn't happen. Instead, the House Freedom Caucus, led by Mark Meadows, cut a deal to support Paul Ryan. In the words of Politico writing in 2017, Meadows was nothing short of a savior for Ryan. So Mark Meadows gave us the speaker who killed the Trump agenda. Thanks to Mark Meadows and Paul Ryan and Mike Pence, the America First agenda was killed in its infancy, totally forgotten, totally abandoned. Then conveniently, Paul Ryan and his House leaders all decided to retire in 2018, millionaires nonetheless, in effect helping to hand the Speaker's gavel directly to Nancy Pelosi. The GOP, in 2 short years, managed to kill all of Trump's 2016 momentum and lost the House in 2018, and then that was that. The America First agenda was dead, gone, buried, finished, over. But somehow Meadows still had Trump convinced that he was this big ally of his. So in 2020, he was brought in to serve as chief of staff. Well, what did Paul Ryan's savior, Mark Meadows, do as chief of staff exactly? Well, he assisted in pushing what ultimately turned out to be a failed response to coronavirus. The response, which most of us now know, was a coordinated effort to weaken the United States and hijack a presidential election. And Mark Meadows was right there with Mike Pence every step of the way, pushing the Trump administration further in the direction of validating the CDC and Fauci's recommended responses. Meadows and Pence worked to push the Trump administration deep into Operation Warp Speed. This is Mark Meadows and Mike Pence's legacy. Meadows is out of office now, so he's free to take consulting or lobbying fees from whichever corporations he chooses. But Meadows and Pence accepted on its face the COVID premise that Fauci and EcoHealth Alliance launched on the world out of Wuhan, China. And as Donald Trump gears up for another run in 2024, I think it's worth asking whether Mark Meadows is being paid by some of the pharmaceutical companies that he helped to enrich during his brief stint as chief of staff. Fair question? But Operation Warp Speed and forced vaccinations across America isn't all that Mark Meadows helped give us. Meadows also directly assisted in giving America Joe Biden. In November and December of 2020, when it was finally time to put the capstone on a year-long global effort to remove Donald Trump, rather than standing firm, rather than grabbing his balls and rejecting the fraudulent electors sent to the joint session of Congress on January 6th, no, Mark Meadows undercut the Paul Gosar-led effort to stop Joe Biden's coup d'etat and instead pushed Trump into meekly leaving office. So that's Mark Meadows. Acquiescence to Paul Ryan in 2017 and 2018. Rolling over for the big pharma push to force vaccines on the entire American populace in 2020. and caving to fraudulent electors in December 2020 and January of 21 and giving us Joe Biden. Pretty interesting. And now we're finally beginning to learn why all of this quiet perfidy has been happening. There's a new report out from National File that could well explain why Meadows has been such a pushover for the globalists. According to National File, Meadows has substantial professional ties to a group called the Humpty Dumpty Institute. Yes, that's the actual name. Its mission statement is to, quote, inform and foster dialogue amongst critical stakeholders on key global issues, which is intentionally vague. They stay out of the limelight, but they're connected with Congress, the State Department, the UN, business leaders, and a lot more. Now get this. The Humpty Dumpty Institute was once headed by Mark Epstein, a brother of Jeffrey Epstein, you know, the billionaire financier who killed himself 2 years ago. Well, National File has also discovered that Meadows was appointed to the Humpty Dumpty Congressional Advisory Board in 2013, shortly after being elected to Congress, and served on that same board pretty much his entire time in Congress. Here's some more. There were more than 24 Democrats on Humpty Dumpty's Congressional Advisory Board, including Maxine Waters and Adam Schiff, but Mark Meadows was the only Republican. Okay, so what else is worth knowing about the Humpty Dumpty Institute? Besides that they're led by the brother of the world's best connected, most prolific sexual predator and child sex trafficker. Well, the organization is also closely tied to the Taihe Institute, a think tank in China closely tethered to the Chinese Communist Party. The ridiculously named Humpty Dumpty Institute is a threat to U.S. national security because of its clear ties to the Chinese Communist Party. The HDI is astoundingly cozy with, quote, institute known as the Taihe Institute. The Taihe Institute is headquartered in Beijing and is led by several high-level CCP members, globalist elites, transhumanist corporate technocrats from Klaus Schwab's World Economic Forum, and even top-level Chinese military, PLA officials. The Mark Meadows advised HDI is so cozy with the Chinese Communist Party operation that senior members even travel to Beijing every year to participate in what they call Taihe Civilizations Forums, where the organizations openly discuss globalist Chinese communism, all the while flirting with transhumanist ideology. How do we know this? Well, because the HDI leadership brags about their attendance. HDI Associate Director Morgan DiNicola, HDI Executive Director Joseph Mrate, HDI Director Ruby Wong, who, like Epstein, was removed from the HDI website, have all been photographed in China at these events with Taihe Institute leadership. You can even see the Great Wall of China in the background. Further evidence that the Meadows advised Taihe Institute linked HDI is clearly in bed with Communist China can be seen on their own website. They celebrate Chinese Communist Belt and Road Initiative, and they post press releases about Stop Asian Hate and other obvious CCP talking points. Well, we don't need more evidence that Meadows and HDI are tied closely to the Chinese Communist Party, but we'll take a look at it anyways. Let's look at the Meadows' pal at HDI's current chairman, Al Khalifallah. Meadows' pal, Al Khalifallah, has been to China several times to meet with high-level CCP leaders with military parade welcomes. Khalifallah brags about his ties to China on his own Twitter account. And Mark Meadows' pal, Al Khalifallah, was even photographed in the birthplace of Mao Zedong alongside top CCP officials. This might seem like a lot to take in at first glance. And the Stu Peters Show is probably the first show ever to discuss the Humpty Dumpty and Taihe Institutes. And the full report at National File is extensive and undeniable. Who knows how deep this rabbit hole goes? But we've got a lot of questions, and so should you. Why was Mark Meadows working for a deeply Democrat-allied globalist nonprofit run by Jeffrey Epstein's brother that has alarming ties to an active Chinese Communist Party cell hell-bent on global communism and satanic transhumanism? Would a real America First patriot be so deeply involved with deep state globalist Democrats, Epstein affiliates, people in league with CCP members, and transhumanist Klaus Schwab sycophants? This report raises serious questions as to whether the former president knew about Meadows' ties to the CCP-affiliated Humpty Dumpty Institute. But one thing we do know for certain, Meadows should absolutely come clean about what he was doing with these Chinese communists. But instead, Meadows will go on the Steve Bannon show, bragging about his book yet again and pretend that he's fighting hard against the CCP. We haven't read it yet, and we don't recommend that you buy it, but it seems very unlikely that Meadows' new book, The Chief's Chief, mentions his role with the Epsteins, HDI, or the Taihe Institute at all. So that's Mark Meadows. It certainly makes one think a little bit about last December when President Trump had an Oval Office meeting with Michael Flynn, Sidney Powell, and Patrick Byrne about the Biden coup and how to move forward to reverse the stolen election. According to reports about that meeting, Meadows and White House counsel Pat Cipollone forcibly shut down that meeting. According to leakers in the meeting, and likely Meadows himself, the meeting was, quote, headed in an alarming direction. We all know what happened. Meadows and Pence effectively shut down the effort to reverse the Biden win. Pence got his political just desserts, but Mark Meadows has yet to receive any consequences for his involvement in the very same plot. Did Meadows shut down that meeting for the good of the country or for the good of himself? And how much at this point does the personal good of Mark Meadows just overlap with what's good for communist China? Chinese infiltration into GOP politics is a clear, subversive threat to our national security, and it looks like that Chinese communist infiltration has managed to infect even the president's chief of staff. Mainstream media, law enforcement, elected officials on both sides of the aisle, including so-called conservative pundits on Fox News and elsewhere, are completely going to ignore this story. I hope you'll make sure this goes everywhere. America deserves to know who's influencing President Trump on a daily basis.